My friends, welcome back to Staying Strong for Marriages. Also, welcome to the fall. I thought since we had such a beautiful background, I would share it with you. I'm going to be reading again from C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. So, The Great Divorce is really a story about. It's a fictional story. It's a fantastical world, essentially, of looking at a town which reigns perpetually and nothing is ever very solid. You can't really build anything exactly. There's no permanence in this place. And it's essentially hell. There is this bus that comes and stops at a certain corner and picks up passengers, whoever would be interested in going to something of like a heavenly land, something like it's like a near heaven. It's not he sometimes uses the term deep heaven. Anyways, in this point in the story, our protagonist, he has kind of met a number of different people. He has decided to get on the bus, and he has watched a lot of other people who are trying to figure out, do they really want to go with some of these say enlightened creatures whose ministry has been to try to talk these people into going into the deep heaven, to keep going, to trust them, to let go of all their strange sort of hang-ups and false beliefs and, I don't know, addictions, these weird things. We're going to be looking at one more part. And I'm going to read this, and I don't know how far I'm going to get, so nothing to see other than the background. I'll just be reading. And to bring you into the chapter, the protagonist, he's going along and he meets it looks like an old weathered man who has somehow kind of had the wrinkles from his face redeemed by eternity, by some sort of restoration. He carries a Scottish accent, and his name is George MacDonald, the author. And so, because Lewis in real life was something of a intellectual himself and well accustomed with the great authors of the past, he kind of installs that into his protagonistic character. And so we go on, and here's where they pick up. And this maybe is going to take a while, but we'll just see how far we get. I'll stop when I stop, and we'll see how it goes. So he says, the Scottish older, figure, big, looming figure is sitting, calls out to the man, the protagonist that C.S. Lewis, has created for us. And the response, the older Scottish man is defined like this. I defined the network of wrinkles which must have been surrounded them before rebirth had washed him in immortality. So the protagonist says, I don't quite know, I said. You can sit and talk to me then, he said, making room for me on the stone. I don't know you, sir, said I, taking my seat beside him. Oh, my name is George, he answered. George MacDonald. I'm not going to try the Scottish accent. Sorry guys. George MacDonald, he says. Oh, I cried, then you can tell me. At least you will not deceive me. Then, supposing that these expressions of confidence needed some explanation, I tried, trembling, to tell this man all that his writings had done for me. I tried to tell him how a certain frosty afternoon at Leatherhead Station, when I first bought a copy of Fantasies, being then about 16 years old, had been to me what the first sight of Beatrice had been to Dante. Here begins the new life. I started to confess how long that life had delayed in the region of imagination merely, how slowly and reluctantly I had come to admit that his Christendom had more than an accidental connection with it, how hard I had tried not to see that the true name of the quality which first met me in his books is holiness. He laid his hand upon mine, and he stopped me. Son, he said, your love, all love, is of inexpressible value to me. But it may save precious time. Here he suddenly looked very Scotch. If I inform you that I am well acquainted with these biographical details, in fact, I have noticed that your memory misleads you in one or two particulars. Oh, I said, and became still. Ye had started, said my teacher, to talk of something more profitable. Sir, I said, I had almost forgotten it. I had no anxiety about the answer now, though I still have a curiosity. It is about these ghosts, meaning all these other figures that he's seen kind of departing the bus and having all these different experiences in this like middle ground somewhere in like a shallow heaven, maybe we could call it. Anyway, so I'll continue. So he asks, do any of them stay? Can they stay? Is any real choice offered to them? How do they come to be here? Did you ever hear of the refrigerarium? A man with your advantage might have read it in the Prudentius, not to mention Jeremy Taylor. The name is familiar, sir, but I'm afraid I have forgotten what it means. It means that the damned have holidays, excursions, you understand? Excursions to this country. They were having a lot of problems in that present state in the country that they were in, so that's why he says that. Excursions to this country? For those that will take them, of course, most of the silly creatures don't. They prefer taking trips back to Earth. They go and play tricks on the poor draft woman you call mediums. They go and try to assert their ownership of some house that once belonged to them. And then you get what's called a haunting. Or they go to spy on their children, or literary ghosts hang out about public libraries to see if anyone's still reading their books. But if they came here, can they really stay? Aye. You'll have heard of the Emperor Trajan did, but I don't understand. Is judgment not final? Is there really a way out of hell into heaven? Well, it depends on the way you're using the words. If they leave that gray town behind, it will not have been hell. To any that leaves it, it's purgatory. And perhaps she had better not call this country heaven. Not deep heaven, you understand. Here he smiled at me. You can call it the valley of the shadow of life, and yet to those who stay here, it will have been heaven from the first. And you can call those sad streets in the town yonder the valley of the shadow of death. But to those who remain, there they will have been hell even from the beginning. I suppose he saw that I looked puzzled, for presently he spoke again. Son, he said, you cannot in your present state understand eternity. When Anodos looked through the door of the timeless, he brought back no message. But you can get some likeness of it if you say that both good and evil, when they are full grown, become retrospective. Not only this valley, but all this earthly past will have been heaven to those who are saved. Not only the twilight in that town, but all their life on earth too, will then be seen by the damned to have been hell. That is what mortals misunderstand. They say of some temporal suffering, no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn even that agony into a glory. And of some sinful pleasure they say, let me but have this, and I'll take the consequences, little dreaming how damnation will spread back and back into their past and contaminate the pleasure of the sin. Both processes begin even before death. The good man's past begins to change so that his forgiven sins and remembered sorrows take on the quality of heaven. The bad man's past already conforms to his badness, and is filled only with dreariness. And that is why, at the end of all things, when the sun rises here, and the twilight turns to blackness down there, the blessed will say, "We have never lived anywhere except heaven." And the lost, "We were always in hell." And both will speak truly. Is not that very hard, sir? I mean, that is the real sense of what they will say. In the actual language of the lost, the words will be different, no doubt. One will say he has always served his country right or wrong, and another that he has sacrificed everything to his art, and some that they've never been taken in, and some that, thank God, they've always looked after number one, and nearly all that at least they've been true to themselves. And the saved? The saved. What happened to them is best described as the opposite of a mirage. What seemed, when they entered it, to be the veil of misery turns out, when they look back, to have been a well. And where present experience saw only salt deserts, memory truthfully records that the pools were full of water. Then those people are right who say that heaven and hell are only states of mind? Hush, he said sternly, do not blaspheme. Hell is a state of mind. You never said a truer word. And every state of mind, left to itself, every shutting up of the creature within the dungeon of its own mind is, in the end, hell. But heaven is not a state of mind. Heaven is reality itself. All that is fully real is heavenly. For all that can be shaken will be shaken, and only the unshakable remains. But there is a real choice after death. My Roman Catholic friends would be surprised, for to them souls in purgatory are already saved. And my Protestant friends would like it no better, for they'd say that the tree lies as it falls. They're both right, maybe. Do not fash yourself with such questions. You cannot fully understand the relations of choice and time until you are beyond both. And ye were not brought here to study such curiosities. What concerns you is the nature of the choice itself, and that you can watch them making. Well, sir, I said, that also needs some explaining. What do they choose, these souls who go back? I have seen no others. And how can they choose it? Milton was right, said my teacher. The choice of every lost soul can be expressed in the words, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. There is always something they insist on keeping, even at the price of misery. There is always something they prefer to joy. That is, to reality. You see it easily enough in a spoiled child who would sooner miss its play and its supper than to say it was sorry and be friends. You call it the sulks, but in the adult life it has 100 fine names. Achilles' wrath and Coriolanus' grandeur, revenge and injured merit, and self-respect, and tragic greatness, and proper pride. Then is no one lost through the undignified vices, sir? Through mere sensuality? Some are, no doubt. The sensualists, I'll allow you, begin by pursuing a real pleasure, though a small one. His sin is the less. But the time comes on when, though the pleasure becomes less and less and the craving fiercer and fiercer, and though he knows that joy can never come that way, yet he prefers to joy the mere fondling of unappeasable lust and would not have it taken from him. He'd fight to the death to keep it. He'd like well to be able to scratch, but even when he... sorry, the phone ran out of storage, and I got a little cold. So he finishes off this section about this individual who he says he'd like well to be able to scratch, but even when he can scratch no more, he'd rather itch than not. He was silent for a few minutes, and then he began again. You'll understand there are innumerable forms of this choice, sometimes forms that one hardly thought of at all on earth. There was a creature came here not long ago and went back. Sir Archibald, they called him. In his earthly life, he'd been interested in nothing but survival. He'd written a whole shelf full of books about it. He began by being philosophical, but in the end, he took up physical research. It grew to be his only occupation, experimenting, lecturing, running a magazine, and traveling too, digging out queer stories among Tibetan lamas, and being initiated into brotherhoods in Central Africa. Proofs, and more proofs, and then more proofs again, were what he wanted. It drove him mad if he ever saw anyone taking an interest in anything else. He got into trouble during one of your wars for running up and down the country telling them not to fight because it wasted a lot of money that ought to be spent on research. Well, in good time, the poor creature died and came here. And there was no power in the universe would have prevented him from staying and going on to the mountains. The mountains are this basically idea of the deep heaven. So there's no power that could have prevented him from staying in hell and going on to the mountains. But do you think that did him any good? This country was of no use to him at all. Everyone here had survived already. Nobody took the least interest in the question. There was nothing more to prove. His occupation was clean gone. Of course, if he would have only admitted that he'd mistaken the means for the end and had a good laugh at himself, he could have begun all over again like the little child and entered into joy. But he would not do that. He cared nothing about joy. In the end, he went away. How fantastic, I said. Do you think so? Said the teacher, with a piercing glance. It is nearer to such as you than you think. There have been men before now who got so interested in proving the existence of God that they came to care nothing of God at all. Or it says that they came to care nothing for God himself, as if the good Lord had nothing to do but exist. There have been some who are so occupied in spreading Christianity that they never gave thought to Christ. Man, ye see it in smaller matters. Did you never know a lover of books that with all his first editions and signed copies, he had lost the power to read them? Or an organizer for charities that had lost all love for the poor? It is the subtlest of all snares. Moved by my desire to change the subject, I ask why the solid people, since they were full of love, did not go down into hell and rescue the ghosts. Why were they content simply to meet them on the plain. One would have expected a more militant charity. You will understand that better, perhaps, before you go, he said. In the meantime, I must tell ye that ye have come further for the sake of the ghosts than you can understand. Every one of us lives only to journey further and further into the mountains. Every one of us has interrupted that journey and retraced immeasurable distances to come down today on the mere chance of saving some ghosts. Of course, it is also a joy to do so, but you cannot blame us for that. And it would be no use to come further, even if it were possible. The sane would do no good if they made themselves mad to help madmen. But what of the poor ghosts who never get into the omnibus at all? Everyone who wishes it does. Never fear. There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, "Thy will be done." And those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will be done." All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek find. To those who knock, it is opened. At this moment, we were suddenly interrupted by the thin voice of a ghost talking at an enormous speed. Looking behind us, we saw the creature. It was addressing one of the solid people, and was doing so too busily to notice us. Every now and then, the solid spirit tried to get in a word, but without success. The ghost's talk was like this. And the chapter continues. But the things that really caught me are the bits about, say, patriotism, say, work, throwing ourselves so deeply into our, whatever our career is, to advance that career, or to be great at it, or to, whatever success is, to let that get to be too much. And then the same was true for anyone who's in ministry. The same was true for anyone who is involved in works of charity to help the poor. That it's possible that the whole thing can get so distorted. So I also think that the same can be true of standing, which is why I've started to kind of do some other videos that really relate to other parts of life, Things I've done some things about prepping, done some things about investing with cryptos. We've looked at, of course, we've done the same, a lot of the same stuff about looking at the scriptures and some of the theology. But as a channel host, one thing I've kind of come to realize after looking at the whole thing for 7 years, is that there are going to continue to be very, very technical, deep, complex arguments that we'll be confronted with. I actually like those. I think there's a lot of benefit in diving into that. And we have a video, check Neil Doster's in the title. Neil Doster and AJ really, really go back and forth. These two gentlemen are probably more educated, and it's just interesting to read what they have to say, because they are on opposing sides of the marriage permanence debate, and it's very, very interesting to see what they have to say and then take that to the Lord. But what I mean to say is that I think at a certain point, it's become very clear to me that, those deep, deep, deep desires and almost like prayers of anxiety or panic, right? God, please save our family. God, don't let this other baby come into the picture. Which I like that part. How even if we have years of loneliness, even if we believe that God wants us to walk away from a marriage that seems to be working because of marriage permanence and the scriptures and the avoiding adultery, and don't even let a hint of sexual immorality be found among you, and all these types of things, right? In obedience to the Lord, we're gonna suffer loss. Definitely, it's gonna be hard. But I like that part where, he comes back and he says, for those people that, whatever you have to give up, right, in order to follow Christ, whether it's some, like sexual or some kind of weird kind of idol that's come from patriotism, or because this is Veterans Day, but I didn't plan that. But or career success, or taking that vacation, or getting that, I don't know, achieving that ministry thing. Marriage is going to come to an end. How about let's end it like that? Marriage is going to come to an end. Missions is going to come to an end. Ministries to the poor is going to come to an end. The medical profession is definitely is going to come to an end. I think the point I liked is that either A, you can make your wife and your stand an idol and get too carried away with it. That you might feel, well, I can just never live without sex. I have to get remarried. I just can't handle that. Or companionship. I can't go without companionship. Or I gotta have kids. Or I just can't be alone the rest of my life. It's interesting that the retrospective experience of heaven in the long term, according to this book, would be that even those things would be redeemed for those who are saved. We'll talk to you next time.